With Season of the Deep, we got a bunch of updates to our exotics, so the one I was looking out for the most was the Chromatic Fire. So in this one, I wanted to take a break from updating my Season 21 builds and talk about how the new Chromatic Fire works and kind of mention how it's still not in the best place in my opinion. So if you don't know what happened to it, they increased the damage and burst of the explosion, and they also added subclass verbs to the explosion, where a strand will sever, arc will blind, void will weaken, solar will scorch, and stasis will slow. Now on paper, that sounds really good, especially some of those, and also just with the damage buff itself, you would imagine it could do some pretty cool things. Well, after a bunch of testing, I can go on and say that this exotic is in a better place. However, I really don't think you're going to run it over other exotics, and I'll explain why. Really quick though, if you find yourself coming back to the channel enjoying my content, consider subscribing and dropping a like. I'm on the road to 40,000 subscribers, so every single bit of support from you all goes a long way, and it is truly appreciated. So let's start off talking about the explosion. On lower end content, this will pretty much kill anything, which kind of does suck when it comes to playing into the actual other aspect of the exotic or applying verbs when you're doing damage, because if everything just dies, you're not going to be able to apply any of those verbs. So in my head, this is already leaning being more towards a end game based exotic, so you can actually use the second part of the exotic. But if we take a look at that second part, let's first start off with looking at severs. When you sever an enemy, they are just going to do reduced damage to you. So as you see here, you can get a kill, explodes, everything severs, the Vex is starting to do less damage. This is pretty good for survivability, and if you could maybe proc it on a boss, it'll be good too. But if you just equip the arc subclass, every single precision hit just blinds enemies and they don't shoot you at all. So in this sense, you're competing against an enemy doing reduced damage to you versus them just not being able to shoot you, and you're pretty much always going to take arc. Also, I do want to point out, when you run arc, it seems that the explosion is just immediately. Normally the explosion will go off a little bit after you get the kill, but with arc, it just kind of throws that away and just goes off the second you get the kill. Arc, in my opinion, is one of the strongest things you can pair with Chromatic Fire, but even then, it's still just not amazing. But now we can take a look at things like Scorch and Slow, and I'm going to pair both of these together because they both kind of work the same way. They're both initial effects that want to lead to a big effect, where Slow leads to freeze and Scorch leads to ignite. But after testing this for so long, I was never even able to get an ignition off while having Ember of Ashes equipped. And same for Slow, I was never really able to get a freeze off, but I guess just doing the tick damage with Scorch is going to be nice if your explosion doesn't get a kill. Hopefully the Scorch can finish them off, and whereas the Slow will slow enemies down, which will make them easier to kill as well. But overall, again, they just don't really stand out too much. And then we get to the final one, which is Void, and that is Weaken. And this Weaken is the exact same as the Weaken in the Void subclass, and in my opinion, this is the best thing you can pair with it if you are going to try to build craft into it. Obviously, being able to have a Weaken just based on if you can get a kill or not is nice. Problem is though, and this is with every single verb it has to offer, the explosion on its own I feel like isn't big enough to actually consistently proc, and you have to be in areas with large groups of ads for you to even get use out of it. Enemies can just kind of walk away, and the whole point of the exotic is useless. But if you are in high density scenarios and you don't have an ability, you can definitely just be sure to get a kinetic weapon kill, and you can apply weakened enemies, which is nice. But on the other hand, talking about abilities, the problem with this build is that you have pretty much any other build that's going to be really good. Specifically with Void, you could just equip a Void build that can take advantage of Controverse Hold, and you're going to be able to weaken enemies like crazy with this, especially pairing with Child of the Old Gods. You can even take stasis based builds that are going to freeze enemies a whole lot better than that will ever do, and you can have these cooldowns pretty much up all the time. Even arc builds you can play into blind as well if you do craft around it correctly, and overall I think it will just always be better than what this has to offer, because you can actually trigger what you want to do on whatever enemies in the game, whereas again with Chromatic Fire, they have to always be grouped up, and it just doesn't work like that all the time. So the only real thing I see that you can get out of this is the fact that it doesn't require any of your cooldowns. But with the amount of ability regen alongside just build crafting in general, you're going to be able to have your abilities up all the time anyway, and you can also, like I said, pinpoint exactly where you want to have that effect. Whereas this is completely based on how the game spawns enemies and can be kind of related to RNG. Now fret not, even with that, if you do want some fun combinations, one really cool thing you can do is run something like Outbreak Perfected alongside a Void subclass, because your nanites and the Void will weaken enemies, and your nanites can kind of just start to kill everything. Also, since there are verbs based on your subclass, they will actually pair with other things in your subclass like fragments and even artifact perks, and there's definitely some fun stuff you can do with that. Now, on the other hand, you can also take something like Ace of Spades to get that increased Firefly damage, pairing those two explosions together pretty much in any content in the game. If there are enemies around, it will pretty much instantly kill them. But again, you're at the game's whim to actually group enemies up, or at least know spawns of enemies so you can use it effectively. I was really hoping I was going to like this more than what I currently do, and maybe I'm wrong. If you have any setup, be sure to drop it down in the comments below and I will give it a shot. But overall, with my first impressions, I really think this still isn't as good as it could be. I do like the change they did to it, but just the playstyle of it, comparing it to literally any other build in the game, I just don't really see why you would use it over any of the other ones. But overall, those are my thoughts and opinions on the new Chromatic Fire and just showing how it works. Again, let me know what you all think about it in the comments below. Have you tried this out, or are you just sticking to your other builds because they just perform a little bit better? I'm not exactly sure what they could do with this exotic to make you want to use it over some other stuff, but overall, it does seem like they are on the right direction by adding those verbs to it, since it can play into your subclass, but in reality, it is only go with two decent ones, with that being Void and Arc. But anyways, that's going to do it all for me. I really hope you all enjoy. More builds are going to be coming soon, so be sure to stick around the channel. But thank you all so much for watching this one, and have a great day. Peace.